Looking to take your financial knowledge to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to Ask Ralph, offering accounting, technical, and financial advice. Whether you're looking to save taxes or improve your business, he's got you covered. Here's your host of Ask Ralph, Ralph Eastup Jr.
Welcome back to the Ask Ralph Show. Today I'd like to talk about something that's not terribly fun to talk about, but it's something that we all have to face as we get older. And that is the death of a spouse and the impact that that can have on your finances. You know, among the risks that married couples face in retirement, this one is completely unavoidable. There's a great article written by Robert Powell of the USA Today that was written on the 14th of January 2018, and he highlights some of the things that we really need to discuss. And I was reading this article and I said, wow, that is so true. And I see so many clients in my practice who really haven't planned for this. And it's one of the things that you definitely can plan for, but it's something that's tough to talk about. So let's talk about some of the things that we need to be discussing. And that is, what happens when the death of a spouse happens? Will there be a decline in your economic status? The title of this particular article is Death of a Spouse Can Drain Finances. And you know what they found? There's a group called the Society of Actuaries, and they wrote a report, Managing Post-Retirement Risk, a Guide for Retirement Planning. And here are some of the things that they said, when a spouse dies, these are some of the things that can accompany this. Number one is some income may stop at the death of a spouse or former spouse. That's something you need to take into consideration. Number two, the death of a disabled person's caregiver spouse may bring financial problems at a very difficult time. Another thing, the surviving spouse may not be able or willing to manage the family's finances. I've met a lot of clients who the surviving spouse had no idea what was going on with the family finance because they just never handled it. And, all of this is with the inability to cope with a spouse's death or terminal illness contributes to high rates of depression. And this is the leading cause of suicide in the elderly. And this is one of those things where it's difficult to predict which spouse is going to live longer in individual cases. But unfortunately for us men, women are widowed more often than men. It's the way it works out. That's what the actuaries say. So what are some things we can do right now to plan for this? And I don't care how old you are. This is something that will affect you from at any age. So the first thing they recommend here is setting aside some time to talk. This is a difficult thing for couples to talk about, but it's one of the greatest gifts they can do for each other. And there's a lady here named Cindy Levering. She's a retired pension actuary and volunteer for Society of Actuaries. And she said, start by saying this, and I quote, "Honey, because I love you so much, I want us to talk about some important money issues together that are really important to know about for the time one day when one of us is gone." And what she says here is, first and foremost, spouses, especially women, need to know about the household finances, including where all the accounts are held. My family went through this not too long ago. My wife lost her father, and my mother-in-law, she really didn't have a very good clue about where anything stood. And there was a few days before she really got her hands around everything where she didn't know whether she'd be able to stay in her home. And where this starts is, it's important that they know what benefits might be available from their employment-based plans, such as a pension, 401k, life insurance, and medical, and how and who to contact to handle these things. It puts the surviving spouse in a really tough situation where they're dealing with the grief and emotions of widowhood, plus not having any clue about how their money situation is going to be. And you may not just share this with your other spouse. It may be a discussion to have with your children. One of the things that you can really do, it mentions in this article, and I 100% agree with, is run what-if scenarios. Determine whether your financial plan will provide enough lifetime income to the surviving spouse. And you can't assume that just because you've lost half of the marriage or half of the family that it doesn't necessarily decrease those costs by half. And the surviving spouse may have less to live on. Especially, and I see this with a lot of my elderly clients where they've been taking care of their husband or wife, and they've really had to use a lot of their assets, to care for this person. And you're stuck with this, once you run these, what if scenarios and comparisons, you consider, what can we do? Well, we can increase our savings now. We might trim our expenses, investigate a reverse mortgage. And I'm not really going to get into the weeds on that, but it's something we can talk about in the future, or downsizing or buying additional life insurance. One of the other things you can talk about with these what-if scenarios is, if you're the high income earner, and I get this question all the time in my practice, consider delaying Social Security until at least full retirement age, which they call FRA, or even until 70, if there's a good chance your spouse will outlive you. I've had many situations where husband and wife are, a situation where the husband is maybe a considerably older, maybe 10 years older than the spouse. And, one of the things that I always recommend to that particular situation is, hold out for taking your Social Security as long as you can, because the surviving spouse collects a higher lifetime benefit based on the primary earner's benefits. So that might be something you want to hold out for as long as you can. And, when you're running these what-if scenarios, also look at, if you've got a traditional defined benefit plan at work. A lot of those have an option where you can decide to take less in retirement, but your surviving spouse would have an annuity moving forward. Another thing you want to look at, after your what-if scenarios is, check all your beneficiary designations. And I don't know how many times I've had to deal with situations where people have, either been remarried or they changed jobs, and, they never went and looked at the beneficiaries who are listed. And it happens all the time when an ex-spouse or other parties receive retirement funds upon the worker's death instead of the current spouse, because they've not taken the time to go back and take a look at these things. Look at all your life insurance plans, bank and credit union accounts, checking and savings accounts, title and real estate, and all those type of things. I had a situation not too long ago where one of my clients passed away, and he had neglected to leave a beneficiary for his IRA. So what ended up happening was the IRA was paid to an estate. Well, that's a horrible tax situation, because then the estate had to pay a 35% estate tax on those distributions, all because a beneficiary was not listed. You want to make sure that your credit cards are set up so that both spouses have access, and consider long-term care insurance. All of this coupled with hiring a financial team. You need to put in place a team of advisors, and I would include an attorney, an accountant, a certified financial planner that the surviving spouse will feel comfortable with. That's one of the things that we did for my mother-in-law when my father-in-law passed away is, we put her in front of, one of our good friends who's a financial planner, and, he was able to unwind all of this and put her together in a plan that made sense for her. And what goes along with that is, making sure your estate documents are up to date. Now, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to talk about those specifically, but these are your estate planning documents, such as a will, a trust, advance directive, living wills, durable power of attorney for healthcare, and physician's orders. These are things you can plan ahead with. You can set these things up so that there's no question what happens. You might also consider doing your funeral arrangements. And this might sound kind of ridiculous, but I know my grandparents did this before they passed away. I remember going one day up to the memorial park with my grandfather, and his stone was already there with his name on it. So he had already made those plans. He already put together what he wanted to do, and finally, it might come down to this, and you might have to be deciding to relocate. You may have to be the surviving spouse that can move to a new home that's easier to upkeep, that has lower taxes, and those sort of things where you can reduce the costs. These are all things that we can manage, but we've got to really take a hard look at them. I hope this has been helpful to you, and I'm certainly, if you have any questions or follow up on this, feel free to shoot me an email at ralph@askralphmedia.com.
You've been listening to Ask Ralph, brought to you by Saggio Accounting Plus. Please subscribe to and rate our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating and review. Our podcast is produced by Carolyn Peters. Thank you for listening, and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Ask Ralph Media. You can also hear me each week on 1450 WILM and on 1410 WDOV in Delaware, and on the iHeartRadio app. Submit your questions or ideas for future shows by sending an email to AskRalph@AskRalph.com.
The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.